So there's a lot of different ways I could kind of go with this. Uh, but I think it was 2 weeks ago. Michael Knowles was at CPAC and he said something about marriage. Um, and he basically defined what marriage was. Definitely not controversial at all, right? Um, and it dawned on me, like, because of the blowback on him, like even from like conservative side, uh, that we are really close to losing the battle for marriage. Maybe even just like giving up. Um, but conservative political action conference, or yeah, I think that's what it is. Um, and I mean, he's saying things that, 5 minutes ago, everyone in the world would have agreed with. And pretty much like getting vilified for it. So what I think I want to do uh is actually talk about or at least give us a language to be able to talk to people about why marriage is what it is, and can only be what it is. And I think it's another one of those, like when we did the transgender topic, um, I think we really struggle with things that are just common sense, right? Like we struggle talking about and having a language around things that we just intuitively know.
This society's lost like its grasp of mental law. Right?
Yes.
So when we're actually like asked to defend that, it's very hard to do so.
Yeah, and like you would think that it's like a sanity check too, right? You're like, okay, why am I even having to come up with language to defend this? And I think part of that is like at the heart of this, right, is that the Fatima seer, Sister Lucia, shortly before she died, sent a letter to one of the cardinals in Rome, and she basically said that Jesus had told her that like the final battle between Satan and Christ was over marriage and the family. And I think that sort of has played out in droves. And it, Satan loves smoke screens, right? Like he loves uh making like things that should be very obvious to us somehow difficult to see. So what I'm hoping is that as we talk about this, we can at least come up with ways to talk about it with other people and be able to defend it in a way that makes sense. And you'll see, like, very decidedly, um, obviously everyone suffers where marriage loses its value, or at least loses its understanding. But I think especially who suffers is women, right? And we'll talk about why I think that is as we go. But I think that's also really strange because the overwhelming number or the overwhelming majority of divorces are started by women, and our culture is built as a culture of divorce at this point, right? So we're fundamentally built. I mean, there's an entire divorce industry, but we are fundamentally built for single parenthood, single mother parenthood. And so we're already seeing some of the effect of it. Okay, so why don't we start by coming up with a definition? And I want to use two definitions, okay? And this is the only slide I think I have that draws from something from the church. And so what I want to do is sort of unpack what I think is a theological definition, and then move it down to sort of the social and political definition that we can just have conversations with people about. Okay. So the CDF, I think it was in 2005. I don't remember exactly when it was, came out with a document, kind of ahead of its time, but talking about why you can't give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons, and defined marriage as this: a union between a man and a woman who by mutual personal gift, proper and exclusive to themselves, tend toward the communion of their persons. Okay, so like I said, I think this is the best definition, but it's also really thick and sort of difficult to wrap your head around. So that's why I think it's good to come up with a second definition. But let's talk about this for a second. Okay, so when you define something, like in the Aristotelian sort of way of defining things, you always come up with its genus and its species. Okay, so what group does it belong to? And then what's its specific difference from everything else in that group? Okay. And that makes it really easy to define things. Okay, so this sort of the genus of this is a relationship between two people, right? And what makes it different? So what makes it different from a relationship between siblings? What makes it different from a relationship between friends? All right. And that's its specific difference. So its specific difference is that it's between two people who by their sort of mutual consent unite their entire lives together. All right. So they don't just create community, they create communion, right? And so this includes their entire persons, right? Their minds, their bodies, everything. All right. And so it is then by definition can only be between two people. Okay. And so what we'll call this, just to make it easy, is we'll call it the conjugal definition. Okay. All right. Is that sort of clear, at least as a launching point? Okay, so let me see if I can now put it in sort of common language. Okay. And we'll do the same thing with sort of unpacking. And I'm open to this is my definition, so I'm open to where it's not clear and maybe we can talk about it. So marriage, or it's missing something. Marriage is the lifelong, comprehensive communion of a man and woman, established by their free consent, ordered to the generation and education of children. Okay, so any comments on that? Okay.
I guess it's maybe indirectly implied, but it doesn't specifically mention that it's also ordered with the sanctification of the spouses, right?
Okay. All right, so so Andrew said it's not ordered to the sanctification of the spouses. Yeah, or yeah, it's not, it doesn't say it's ordered to. Yes. Yeah, so we're talking about the natural institution would be the first thing, right? So, but I mean, to Andrew's point, could we somewhere how add to that definition contributes to their perfection, right? Would be and I don't know yeah, I mean I don't, so let me ask the question then. So do you guys think that most people would look at marriage as a means towards their own sort of personal perfection? Well, okay, so I would look at it, I would probably use the word fulfillment because that's what people use,
Yeah.
right? Do you think most people grasp that marriage is that thing? How many say no? I'm inclined to say no. Yeah, the question is, do most people grasp that marriage is the thing that brings meaning to the overwhelming majority of people's lives? Right?
No, I think people have that like predisposing something, but may not necessarily live.
Okay, because the only reason why I think that part, I mean, it's obviously like inherently true. The only reason why I don't see it playing out now, right? I don't see that people actually look towards marriage as a means for life fulfillment, right? How many of you saw like the, I think it was on, I don't know if it's on Twitter or one of them, TikTok maybe, of the dinks.
Oh.
How many of you saw the dinks? Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We don't have kids, we can go to Costco.
Yeah. So their number one thing that they enjoyed most about not having kids, and some of them were married, some were not. But not having kids was that they go to Costco and buy whatever they want.
Right.
Like that, literally, there was groups of them. Yeah, there was like, that was the most common response.
And most of them are not like singers and stuff.
Not like you can stay up late at party.
They're like,
Mm.
our pets are our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I think we have our work cut out for us. Like, well, but that's inherently selfish, right? Yeah. And we'll see why, like, even those people who are married, they're living under a way different presumption as to what marriage is.
It's still ultimately oriented towards like a desire for communion. Even if you look at, when people aren't getting married, but they're still like looking towards at least some of the goods that are like top of marriage.
Mhm.
With the sense that like that would bring them fulfillment, even if they don't understand the incompleteness of that.
Right.
So it seems kind of partial.
Okay.
I think related to let's talk about the different ways that people see marriage, right, as either like the cornerstone or the capstone of the life of adult life of like, is this how I'm going to navigate my world, like in this union and like have life together, or do I want to do all the things and then once I fulfilled myself, then I can accomplish this extra thing?
Yes. Yeah. So it becomes just something that needs to be sort of, it's like a check mark, right? I've done all these things and now it's time to get married. Okay. All right. So if somehow we could work in moving towards personal fulfillment or something along those lines, then maybe the definition would be a little bit maybe cumbersome, but a little more complete. So a couple of things that are sort of sitting in this, right? Again, that word, the word communion, which essentially means a complete sharing of not just domestic life, but mind and body, that, in the truest sense, one flesh. So that's the comprehensive communion. And of course, established by free consent, which would have to be in any definition today, because consent is the most important thing. And notice the order to the generation and education of children. Okay, so that's the piece that I want to sort of just put a little pause on, but come back to it. Okay.
Well, what about exclusivity? I mean,
Yeah, I
it
think,
doesn't come across clearly in the-
right. Yeah, I mean,
Can't put it in
yeah, I think comprehensive communion might, you could include exclusivity in it.
It's not comprehensive.
Yes. But yeah, so like the unity, I mean, I tried to come up with a way that grasped like the sort of the three goods of marriage, right? Like, the unity, the indissolubility and indivisibility, and the order towards the good of children. So I kind of cheated and used the church's goods of marriage. Okay. Okay, so this second definition then at least gives us a way to sort of notice, though, has anyone ever found, like, I've heard so much about redefining marriage. Has anyone ever found someone who defined it, that wanted to redefine it? Like, could they tell us what the definition was and what their new definition is? I have yet to see someone actually come up with a definition.
I'll part with all this when I think about it. I think we know a lot more and spend a lot more time arguing about the ways to get marriage wrong and all the sins, rather than what it's supposed to be. Because the way we've really learned what it's supposed to be is that people actually lived it.
Right.
People aren't really living.
I've had people tell me it's just a piece of paper.
So how do you respond to that?
I tell them, what, it's not, it's a commitment. No, but you could do that without getting married. then I just give up.
Yeah, I mean,
It's actually like- I think that's actually like an interesting, or you can use that in conversation. I had an atheist in college who argued about a lot of stuff, but it was really interesting in talking to him because he was actually like very set on the importance of marriage. And I kept like telling him, okay, like, why do you actually care? Like, what does it matter that the government recognizes this or that, any theoretical facts don't have this, but like, he really cared about it, but he could never like really put it into words why in some like notion of the symbolic value or whatever, but really couldn't express. It's just kind of like deep-seated sense of like, hey, this is actually like something that's important for people, which is really like actually fascinating to see. So it's actually, I think like you can approach people like that and they say, look, it's just a piece of paper. Why do you care about it?
You don't care about what, why do you?
Why do they care about marriage if it's just a piece of paper? Because people do care about it. They spend so much time trying to say, government needs to recognize these kinds of unions as marriages. It needs to, people, this sort should be able to get married. Like, if it's just a piece of paper, like, why do you care?
I think some of it is, it depends on, those are two different conversations. It's just a piece of paper is coming from the angle of, so why bother making like an official commitment? Why make it a whole to do, right? As opposed to like people who want it to be defined and well, these things are recognized by the government, like they're two different conversations. So like in a conversation, someone's like, it's just a piece of paper. Like it might be worth acknowledging, like, unfortunately, yeah, there are a lot of people who treat it like that because like are, right? But then to add, but it's supposed to be more than that. Like it's meant to be more just because people treat it as such, like just because I'm using the chair as a footstool right now, doesn't make the chair a footstool by definition. I'm just using a different big difference in, marriage and like everything else people want it to be. But like as far as my conversation goes, sometimes it's worth acknowledging, yeah, there are people who get it really wrong, but that's how a lot of it is. As like, I mean, Rob's getting to talk.
yeah, I mean, I actually didn't like think about, it's just a piece of paper thing. I mean, my response to that would be, sort of tied up with the consent piece that your word means something, right? Your word publicly stated, means something, such that, when you say something, like new realities, sort of come into existence, right? Like, when I say that I'm going to do something, or I'm going to be something, in a certain way, that reality, like that thing becomes real, right? And so, to say it's, I think one is it's a cop out. I'm very suspicious of people who say something like it's just a piece of paper when, for sort of the Andrew's point, for generation upon generation upon generation, people treated it way more than just a piece of paper. And why are you so enlightened now, compared to everyone else who's lived up to about 50 years ago? So that would be the first question, but it's also like, when someone says that to me, I mean, I had a conversation with my brother-in-law about this because he said the same thing. And I just simply looked at him and asked him, like, well, does your word mean anything? Like, and why do you want to hide your word? Like, why do you want to hide what you're promised to someone? And that seems to be, he didn't really have a good answer to that question. Why are you afraid to publicly profess what you're going to do and what, how you want to live your life? So I think a lot of it is it's just a cop out, right? Of, by trivializing the thing, it seems like it doesn't really matter. And they can do what they want. Yes.
Would you also say in this theoretical argument that we have with this person, I mean, if their response is, oh, well, no, it's the commitment, I guess my answer would be like, we're kind of on the same page in a certain sense, because yeah, I don't think it's the piece of paper either. That's kind of our point, is like, yeah, you can tear up the piece of paper when you get divorced. That doesn't actually work because it's not just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
The question would be like, what is the thing that you say it's a commitment? Well, what is that? Because eventually from that, and you might get to this later, but you can arrive at the idea that it also should be a public commitment, that it doesn't work as just a private relationship between individuals. And therefore you say, okay, well, if it's gonna be public, it probably makes sense to have some sort of record of it. because it's so important, it probably makes sense for the government to be involved in protecting and defending it. And therefore, while it's not the piece of paper, it makes sense to have one.
Yeah, and so this is, I mean, Connor sort of, helps us segue to the next. Okay, so why do we care? Like, why do we care what, whether, why can't it just be a private thing? Okay, and so here's what St. Thomas says: among natural acts, generation alone is directed to the common good. Since eating and the discharge of other superfluities regard the individual, but procreation regards the preservation of the species. Hence, as the law is made for the common good, whatever regards procreation should be regulated before other things by laws both divine and human. Okay, so the state has a compelling interest in marriage for the simple reason that marriage is the foundation of the family and family is the foundation of society. Right, and the state should most certainly care and in a certain respect recognize but also recognize how it's different from other unions, right? Like, does the state have any interest in friendships? Not really, right? So do we see a whole lot of laws about friendships? No, right? What about emotional bonds between people? Not really. Not just on the sort of emotional bond. They don't really regulate relationships between siblings either, right? Because again, those relationships are not ordered towards the common good. And so that's why the state and the rest of us should be interested in our definition of marriage, and should be interested in what, recognizing what marriage is, and recognizing it when it happens. Okay, so there's no room for sort of social indifference towards it, because the fundamental unit of society is the family, right? Not the individual, but the family. The other piece that's worth talking about, especially in a highly sort of individualistic society, is complementarity. So Aristotle describes it, yes. Well, no, I mean, so there's always like a, I don't want to use the word force, but like the state has this tendency, right, of becoming, usurping every other institution that surrounds it, right? And so it will, if you permit it, also usurp the role of the family, right? Which is what we're seeing now, right? And one of the ways it usurps that role is to become like Big Daddy for yeah, they'll take care of your kids, right? And so obviously that's sort of against the principle of subsidiarity, but we also have to fight that. We have to fight that, right? Like you should not leave your kids as wards of the state, at all. I'll just leave it at that. But this other sort of important piece that we do not get in an individualistic society is complementarity. And the church is pretty clear about what complementarity is, but I think Aristotle does a good job of talking about why marriage should be between a man and a woman. So here's what he says: the nature of both partners, man and woman, has been prearranged by a divine dispensation in view of their partnership, for they differ by not having their faculties available all to the same effect, but some even to opposite effects, though combining to a common end. And notice, look at the sort of religious language of this pagan Aristotle, right? For God made the one sex stronger and the other weaker, that the one for fear may be the more careful, and the other for courage and more capable of self-defense. So the mother, because and the woman, because she is weaker, way more protective and careful in her love than the outward courageous and self-defending father. Okay, that's just a simple biological fact. And that the one may forage abroad while the other keeps house. And for work, the one is made competent for sedentary employments, but too delicate for an outdoor life, while the other makes a poor figure at keeping still, but is vigorous and robust in movement. Okay, so this idea that the man is naturally ordered to be the one who goes outside the family, and touching children, the generation is special, but the improvement of children is the joint labor of both parents, for it belongs to one to nurture and the other to chastise. Right. So he's painted like a beautiful picture of family life, right? That totally politically incorrect, but he's coming at it from the standpoint of nature, right? Like, again, if you're looking for a way to thrive, right, that's the image you want to use, right? Is grasping the differences between men and women, where the strengths and the weaknesses lie, and notice how they perfectly are aligned, right? Like God knew what he was doing. Okay. And it just shows how like man and wife together form this perfect human life. Right. So all of the ways in which a man is lacking, a woman is capable. All the ways in which a woman is lacking, the man is capable. And so it's one of the reasons why I think, you know, when we hear complementarity, right, we tend to think, oh, well, men and women bodily fit together, right? But the point is, right, is that those are just mere signs of the fact that they actually fit together, right? Okay, so let's now see if we can, I lied, this is my other quote from the church, sorry, because
So like I'm on the quote church once and not twice, but you like 2 slides later quoted Thomas Aquinas. So
yeah, but I quoted him in the Summa Contra Gentiles, which is he's writing to pagans, right? Like, yeah, so he's coming at it
Thomas Aquinas.
from reason. Yeah, but he's just smart. He's smarter than everybody else, right? And plus Amelia likes when I quote St. Thomas Aquinas, apparently. All right, so the only reason why I did this is because I have no idea where else to find the essential elements of marriage, and this was just easy to come up with a quote. So the three that I want to talk about is unity, indissolubility, and openness to fertility. Okay, so let's talk about unity. Why unity matters. Man, naturally, and this is man as in like men, naturally desires to know his offspring, and this knowledge would be completely destroyed if there were several males for one female. Okay, so his reason for sort of rejecting polyandry is the fact that a man by his nature desires to know his offspring so that he can fulfill his obligation of not just siring the offspring, but raising them. Okay, and so this knowledge would be completely destroyed if there were several males for one female. Therefore, that one female is for one male is a consequence of natural instinct. All right, and then so now he flips it. Okay, what about one man, many women? He says equality is a condition of friendship. Hence, if it were lawful for a man to have several wives, the friendship of a wife for her husband would not be freely bestowed, but servile as it were. And this argument is confirmed by experience, since where men have several wives, the wives are treated as servants. Okay, so his argument against polygamy is that marriage requires equality between the spouses, right? And the minute that a man is wedded to multiple women, there's no longer equality between the spouses, right? And so, so he says that the idea of polygamy is then contrary to the good of unity. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Okay.
What that mean with the last part? Are they trying to say that therefore the woman wouldn't be like used? That's what I was thinking. Like,
Yeah, I mean, so essentially he's saying like that in those situations, the man, because the wife doesn't have like sort of unfettered access to him is a slave.
Mhm.
Because he just comes and goes whenever he feels like. And so it's admittedly, the unity of marriage, the one man, one woman thing is sort of foundational for everything else. And so far we don't seem to be rejecting that. But his argument at least sort of just relies, the reason why I like it is relies on experience. And again, sort of shows like, okay, who suffers here when things are changed.
How does Islam justify like multiple?
Like truly, how they justify it? Because Muhammad did. Like that's their justification for pretty much everything. Is if Muhammad did it, they can wed 9-year-old girls because Muhammad did it. And they will always be able to wed 9-year-old girls because
Girls who hit, even if they have, so portions puberty, they can wed them. So even if it's an infant, they can wed them if they have puberty.
yes. And just because they could never condemn something that Muhammad did. So pretty much anything he does becomes a law unto itself.
It's the same with, Mormons.
Another argument, at least that I've heard, this is from Pension to Friends, so my guy who was like friends with a bunch of Muslims and then eventually she was them. One imam told him because love is love.
Well, it sounds like he got that off of like a John Cena commercial. Was the Imam John Cena?
No, I mean, he made the point of like, well, parents have multiple kids.
We're not the
So-
same. Yeah. I mean, we ain't.
Yeah.
It's not the same, but it's like, well, it's not the same, but then the imam was fine, well, love is love.
Well, but in our culture, that argument works though,
No, it does.
because we don't distinguish between loves at all, right? The only loves we distinguish between are whether it's been sexualized or not. Right? That's it. So I guess he's like a 21st century imam.
Is there like a philosophical explanation for why it happens that women end up getting treated like slaves, or is it servants or like having that conversation where you just be like, it's just every single time? Because people like to say, okay, but like, what if we fix that problem? Or is it just worth being like, well, literally every single time through history, everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the short answer is because, like I said at the beginning, like this is by Satan's design and Satan hates women. Like that's it. Like totally hates women.
Are you talking about like monogamy?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just like a relationship dynamic, right? If there's like one man and multiple women, then the man has access to any woman whenever he wants, but woman only has access to the man when she wants and when he wants. So it's like, it's an asymmetric relationship by nature.
That's painful.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you from, this is being personal, from personal experience, my ex wanted to try Tommy and me. It was, I had to finish it, I had a question of that. Yes, it's,
Yeah. No, I'm not defending it at all. I'm just
No.
trying to think of like
no.
having a conversation.
No.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm basically saying that I can testify to it, that it's, like, it's perfect. Like,
yeah.
Like, it's, yeah.
You see it in relationships versus two people anyway,
Yeah.
where like, females is perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that's the other sort of important piece too, right? Is like the definition that's in there of just seeing that, marriage is a friendship too, right? What were you gonna say, Aaron?
It seems like people that participate in like having like open marriages or like multiple wives, they always make it like they frame it like it's a beautiful thing, like we're sharing each other.
Yeah.
Like they hold like sharing each other as a spiritual like value. It's really strange.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's completely and totally twisted up too, right? Like,
They don't believe it either, it's hope.
yeah,
Yeah. The only thing that I heard is like, the reason that Mormons did it was because they needed to repopulate with more Mormons. That was, and basically because Joseph Smith said, God told me to do it.
well, yeah, he did. Well, first God told him not to, and then God told him to. But
Yeah,
yes.
That was interesting, but.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, I think now,
And
I think now they do, right? They condemn it
Yeah.
now.
No, or no,
they
it
put that
depends
like,
on what
this is their,
group.
like full circle, but they still.
Most more
No.
communities don't practice.
That's not true,
Okay.
because they believe in polygamy in heaven. So here's the thing, when you get married, so
Yeah.
I went on a deep dive recently, anyway, so
You need to find some other stuff to do.
I teach, okay, all
Today, I'm gonna go on a deep dive of Mormonism.
I
I'm
do.
way better off for this.
Face.
Yeah.
15-year-olds all day around.
Okay.
Great for how healthy.
All right, yeah, that's fine. That is healthy.
So, but basically they're explaining that women cannot have multiple husbands. So if they were to, if a woman wants to get remarried, they have to divorce their husband if they've died in heaven. But a man can continue to be sealed with other women because polygamy is okay for men, but not for women. And so in heaven, it's okay if men have multiple wives. So like these Mormon women will set up a list of women that they're okay with to have sister wives with in the afterlife. And that's very normal to have it.
No, yeah, that's very normal / abnormal.
Sucks if you're.
In Utah.
I know.
Yeah.
So I have a question, is the point for them to have more children?
Yeah, to like repopulate because again, Joseph Smith wanted to be able to be with anyone. That was really why. But that's
Yeah, and
why
there's no sort of advantage to multiple men with one
Catholic
woman
families have, like, 10 plus
for-
kids.
for having, like, if you're planning on,
He'll have various wives, but he only really love one.
Yeah,
Does he though?
I mean,
Does he really love any of them?
watch
Or
Sister
at least
Wives on
one knows
TLC, you'll learn.
all right, moving on. All right, so that's unity, indissolubility. For their mutual love will be more constant if they know that they are indissolubly united. They will also be more carefully provident in the conduct of the household when they realize that they are always to remain together in possession of the same things. Again, this precludes the origin of quarrels, which must arise between a husband and his wife's relatives. If he were to put his wife away, and those who are connected through affinity have a greater regard for one another. Moreover, it removes the occasions of adultery, which would occur were the husband free to put away his wife or vice versa. But this would encourage the seeking of further marriage. Okay, so what is his point, which he brings out a little earlier in the Summa Contra Gentiles, is that the way we should order life is it should always be ordered towards what brings out the best in man. All right, and so what he's saying is marriage that is indissoluble brings out the best in man. All right, so it again, going back to the fulfillment sort of understanding of marriage, when you realize that divorce is not a thing, you're going to totally act differently to your wife or your husband, right? And you see this playing out now, right? Like there's a lot of men now who will not get married because a divorce costs too much, right? That's a real thing. It's a real thing because they know the probability that a divorce is coming is way higher than they like, and that it will essentially destroy them financially, and so they don't do it. Okay. And so part of his argument is in some ways, a little bit circular in the sense that if you see marriage as indissoluble, you'll treat it as indissoluble, right? Okay, so going a little deeper into what he's saying about indissolubility, I reply that it should be said that matrimony, from the intention of nature, is ordered to the education of the children, not for a certain time only, but rather for the entire life of the children, which is the reason why, by the law of nature, parents are to lay up wealth for their children, and children should inherit from their parents. All right, so he making two arguments here. That's sort of a side argument. For that reason, since children are a common good of husband and wife, it is necessary, according to the dictum of the law of nature, that the association remain perpetually undivided. Thus, the inseparability of matrimony is based on the law of nature. Okay, so we're back to this sort of that natural desire for man to know his offspring, because the reason why he has a natural desire is because the child has a right to the direction from his father, right? So how does how does a father stay linked to his child? Through the mother, right? Through the relationship of the mother. And so the child has a right to the direction of his father for a long time. Such that even when children are adults, parents still educate their children, right? And the responsibility is still there. They show them how to be adults, right? They show them how to grow old. And so his point is that one, because it takes so long to raise children. And in this argument too, like he talks about, okay, because, people will say stupid things like, well, birds just lay eggs and like they mate and then the male goes off. Why is that? Right. And so he deals with those arguments, and, his basic argument is, well, because educating a human being takes way longer than it takes for a bird to learn how to chirp and fly. And so like, one of the primary roles, of the father, is to educate his children. And obviously that role is also, from the mother. But the point is that, you see this a lot where people get divorced after their kids move out. Basically, what they have taught their children is that marriage is solely for the sake of having children, right? Not for the good of the spouses. And it happens a lot. But the point is that, at least one of my boys is out in the world. I don't cease to be his father and educate him. Because now, the education of teaching him how to be a husband and a father, begins, right?
You say that the link between the father to the child is through the mother, do you mean like relationally or biologically? Or
Both,
Okay.
right? Like, so this is like where this is part of the reason why we have so much trouble with marriage now, right? We don't see things sacramentally, right? So that the bodily link between the father and the mother is the sacramental sign that, the father's relationship with the child is always through the mother. Well, sort of, I mean, yes, but no, right? Like it's very Trinitarian in that way, right? It isn't, I don't mean it in the sense of like, the mother dies and suddenly their relationship is severed. But like, you think about it, right? When the relationship between the husband and the wife is severed, like that profoundly changes the relationship between especially the father and the child, right? It will change the mother's relationship with the child too. But it's the love that the father has for the mother that links him with his son or his daughter.
Is the mother's love for children to the father's?
No, like, because they have that direct biological link, right? Like, in a sense, like it's, almost Eucharistic in a way, like this, even though, yeah, like genetically it's still, but it's just different for women, right? Like they're linked to a child. You see it in scripture, right? Like God goes, well, would a mother abandon their child? And he's like, well, no, but even if she did, I won't abandon you. Right. So like, it's way easier for a father to abandon his children than it is for a mother. Right. And it will never happen if the father loves the mother. Right. And that's the point. Like it links him to his children, not the only way he's linked to it, but it is the way that he permanently stays linked to his children.
So, is that the reason why so many fathers are leaving their kids because they don't really love the wife?
A lot of times, yeah, right? Like, unfortunately, right? This is like why too. I mean, I know I've said this before, but people are always like, when they have kids, they're like, oh, like I love my kids, and all that's great. But like, if you want to be the best father, you should love their mother like perfectly, right? And that doesn't mean you ignore them, but that stability is really important, right? Like, this may make me a jerk, but like, if you were to ask any of my boys, does dad love mom more than you? They would all say yes, right? And they're all comfortable with that, and they should be, because that's the way it's supposed to be, right?
Most people aren't comfortable with that idea. I think if you told them that spouses' relationship with each other is more important than their relationship with their children, that people would feel very uncomfortable. with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but it would also be like, think about it, like I can think about this now, like one of my boys is married, right? That would be really weird. Like he goes and gives himself to somebody else when I was totally invested in him more than I was invested in my wife. Right? That would just be a weird thing. Yeah. People put, I mean, like, do not put your kids first. Right? Like, because they sit on like all of their stability, all of their love is linked to the love between the spouses.
I just make a lot of what you're saying because it's really common now where a lot of women will get with like these athletes. And then they just raise the kids by themselves. But he doesn't really love that woman, like you said. He doesn't have a relationship with her.
Yeah.
You know, he just, so yeah, I resonate with that a lot. I see it. Mhm.
This is going back to the, once kids leave the house. So essentially, like, once your son, like, gets married and all that. In what way would you still be a father, like, to him, like, as an example of you loving your wife?
Yeah, I mean, just like, hey, dad, how do I do this? How do I do that? Like,
Like,
this is going on in like our marriage. How do I?
for example, is if your son did something completely immoral, you knew about it, you would then just call it out or just,
Oh, yeah.
okay, cool.
We were all over the call.
What
Yeah,
happened?
Call Dominic.
Yeah,
'Cause he
so
was asleep.
like just as an example.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
to totally
Maybe we should
different-
record this now. Maybe we should pause the recording.
That's fair. Like just as a silly example,
But how would you justify that this someone that like doesn't understand?
I mean, it's a hard sell in the sense of like, explaining it to somebody, like
Yeah.
somebody who's like totally invested in their kids. But you know, I found most people that don't grasp that are probably living vicariously through their kids. Like they've invested, their future in their kids, if that makes sense. So I think I would go at that before I went at like, I think I would address that with someone like, hey, like, you know, like to Alexa's point, like that's their life, right? Like, and you know, they've got to make their own path, whatever, you know, I don't get any say in like what they become or what they do. So you got to let that part go. But I think a lot of people, I saw this a lot like in coaching, you know, because I coached high school baseball for a long time. I saw a lot of parents vicariously living through their kids, like through sports. Yeah, through sports. And you really have to, I can remember like my first probably 5 or 6 years, like I would send one email beginning of the season to the parents, basically telling them I'm not talking to you. You know, if there's something going on, your son needs to come talk to me. And then if we can't resolve it, I'll let you know. But I also would tell them like, look, this is likely not going to lead to him getting a college scholarship. Like, and he's not your 401k, right? Like you got to let him make his own way. And you know, I didn't necessarily use those, that bluntly about it, but still like you have to pop a lot of people's bubbles that like, I know you think your kid is going to be this great thing and it's going to make your life so much better, but God has other plans for them. And you just, you know, you have to let them become what God wants them to become, not what you didn't do that you want to somehow have your kids do.
Does anyone who's ever coached got a college scholarship for baseball?
One person, which I mean, percentage wise, not that like, I mean, it just doesn't happen, right?
just feel like people like loving the child when they're, you know, the spouse is like, my dad did a good job, like a decent job loving me. He didn't love my mom, right? My parents got divorced when I was 5. And so because regardless of how well he loved me and my sister, because he didn't love my mom more, he didn't love my mom better. And it's a whole different thing, why people divorce conversation, but that led to instability for the rest of my life. Right, that led to so much brokenness and instability because he didn't prioritize what was most important. if you prioritize what's most important, that leads to stability and protects the ability and space to love the child just as well. Like, he could have loved me just as well while still getting married and providing way more stability. Right? You prioritize the child, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't prioritize the spouse, there's way too much instability for the child. It doesn't matter for the child. It's neither in the matter.
Yeah, I think the logic of it, I think the psychological piece of it is that the most important thing for a child to know is that they're not here by accident, but they came from an act of love. And so they have to see that love lived out all the time. That's way more important than anything you give your kids.
Isn't that the right of the kid?
I mean, it is a right to be,
Isn't that like like that's supposed to be the basic right, like that's like justice to the child?
to be conceived in love and
And
like,
and like.
yeah, I would say
The whole idea,
it would be hard to sell that, but I think you're right.
well, yeah, Trent Moore sells it pretty hard, like, cause that's his whole entire argument against like IVF surrogacy, like, that's not his entire argument, but that's
Yep.
a big piece of argument. He's
Yep.
like,
No, that's totally the argument
taking
against
them-
IVF. Yep.
Giving them their proper mother and conceiving them not just in a lab, but in a loving environment.
Yep.
Because most of your example was like the man took on his wife and having the kids. After that, why should the husband living the kids if you know her?
I think that's the mutuality of it. Like, because like love given has to be love received, right? For the child to see it. Yes.
Kind of a side question. Are annulments more common these days?
That is not a side question. That is like a loaded question. The short answer and the only answer I will give is yes. And I will just leave it at that.
Did you say annulment?
Yes. Yeah. And technically there's no such thing as an annulment. It's called a declaration of nullity, but there are a lot of them. No. I'm not even going down that rabbit hole. Cause it'll get me up on a soapbox that I do not need to be on.
Very top
Part
part.
two, BuzzFeed mark.
How to trigger Rob.
Um,
Whenever you ask for suggestions on what.
yeah, I will overlook that one. Or I won't record it when the recording will break. Oops, something went wrong with the recording. Okay, so at the beginning I said how like I think the damage to marriage also does damage to women. And St. Thomas talks about how indissolubility actually protects the woman. And so here's what he says. It would seem also contrary to equity for the aforesaid fellowship to be dissolved. So again, talking about the equality between the spouses. Now the woman is taken into partnership with the man for the purpose of procreation. Consequently, when the woman ceases to be fruitful and fair, there's an obstacle against her being taken by another man. Hence, if a man, after taking a wife in her youth, while she is yet fair and fruitful, can put her away when she is aged, he does her an injury, contrary to natural equity. So in other words, when he abandons her when she's old, and one, like he's talking practically speaking, less likely to be able to get a spouse, but also less likely to be able to take care of herself, right? Consequently, if the husband could leave his wife, there would not be just fellowship between husband and wife, but a kind of slavery on the part of the latter. Okay, so it's a case of him using her for her best years, and then kind of throwing her away. All right, and that's why he says that ultimately, it's funny, like St. Thomas is often accused of being like misogynist, but if you actually read him, he's very, very aware of like the dignity of woman. And this is one of those cases. Yeah, you do have to read him too, actually. Okay, so why is divorce wrong? Yeah, well, yeah, so it's breaking a vow, but because it's an offense against indissolubility, right? The only thing I want to talk about with divorce, and this is going in the direction of like from the perspective of the church, there's this idea that somehow divorce is okay, but as long as you don't remarry. That's totally not true. Right? Divorce is something totally evil that we may have to tolerate in certain circumstances. But there's a sort of impassable chasm between tolerating it and promoting it. And we're certainly in the case of now promoting it. And again, you know, Aquinas says that divorce actually harms the woman more than it does the man, because it leaves the woman without the protection of the man. I think ultimately the issue, right, is that if there's a difficulty in a marriage, right, even if it's like supreme difficulty, like abuse, the problem is not marriage. You don't break the marriage. The problem is the virtue of the spouses, right? The problem is the spouses, not marriage itself, right? And so certainly, if you have to get a legal divorce in order to protect yourself or your assets, you know, that's permitted. But this idea of somehow seeing it as okay is totally misguided. And I wish it would sort of go away, because almost every time you hear someone talk about it, even from a Catholic perspective, like, well, the problem isn't divorce, the problem is remarriage. Well, unless there's a really serious reason for the spouses to separate, you've abandoned your spouse, right? Like that's a morally grave thing. So maybe just, you know, more of a just sort of grasping that, you know, the problem isn't just remarriage, the problem is also divorce.
Divorce in a way, like, the obvious kind of exceptions you alluded to, is also like kind of a, you know, we like point towards despair, right? That I believe that whatever is wrong can't ever be fixed.
Right.
Grace.
Right. Yeah, and that's from like the sacramental perspective, that's definitely true too. Okay, so now let's talk about what we mean by order to the procreation of children. Why is contraception wrong? Don't look at the screen. Can you make an argument as to why contraception is wrong, other than just the church says so?
Well, then you're kind of holding back.
Okay, so
Talking about like a natural law argument why.
You're playing God for that.
well, I mean, yes, you're definitely playing God. What were you gonna say, Aaron? Okay, so what Aaron is talking about is what's called the inseparability principle, and that it has to be that the act has to be both unitive and procreative. But why? Why can't I just you know, why can't I insert contraception just because I want to be intimate and connected to my wife?
You're not giving your full self.
Not
You're
really
required to
connected.
give everything, including your fertility or your lack thereof fertility.
Okay, so it's a withholding. So I think the most effective argument is the one I have on the screen. And I'll tell you why, because I have even had atheists agree with me that contraception was wrong. So we can read it now. All right, so I'll read it and then we'll talk about it. Though a male and female are complete individuals with respect to every other function. All right, so all of your organs in your body are ordered to one thing, right? Like a single biological purpose, sustaining life. For example, nutrition, sensation, locomotion. With respect to reproduction, they are only parts of a mated pair, which is the complete organism capable of reproducing sexually. Even if the mated pair is sterile, intercourse, provided it is reproductive behavior characteristic of the species, makes the copulating male and female one organism. All right, so what is he saying here? He's saying that you cannot be unitive unless you're procreative. So the purpose of the act, right, is that it is meant to be procreative in nature. So, and in order for you to become one thing, to be united, the only way you're united is when you become one biological pair. Okay, and so you cannot insert something in between that Because once you become non-procreative, you also become non-unitive. All right, so that's what Aaron was sort of talking about.
I'm surprised you. Maybe it's too fun at that saying. I'm not saying it's a bad argument, like, I think it's a great argument, but it's very like teleological on most people outside of a religious context don't like.
Yeah,
read anything.
you can, the reason why I think it's like compelling is because they will admit a teleological approach to things when you're talking about on a biological level. They will almost always go like the eye is for seeing, right? Like they'll and that's how you get them to walk into it. Like, what's an eye for? Well, an eye is to see. Well, what's a nose for? To smell. What are reproductive organs for? To reproduce. Use your what? Well, so the fallacy there, like, is that just because there's an example of something that has multiple purposes doesn't mean that everything has multiple purposes, right?
It's also a good point that using the hand in more than one purpose doesn't imply that you're using those multiple purposes on like mutually exclusive, like you're not interfering with one purpose of the hand and using it to run away. Whereas contraception would be doing that, right? Sure. You could argue that, yeah, they procreated in unitive purposes, your reproductive system, like, all that stuff, but that's someone wants to argue that, but like, there's no other example of the interfere with one function, with the function of one kind of body in order to be different.
So are you really trying to argue that they're the same? That's crazy. Wow, that's the rebuttal.
I've heard the example staring at the sun, I feel like that's the thing.
Wait, now I've never heard that. So
So
flesh it out.
if you're using those faculties in a way they're not meant to be, and actually in a way that's kind of defeating the purpose, it's like staring at the sun. Because you're seeing, but you're also burning your eyes out at the same time.
Think maybe like this pushback on that hand thing, like what are the different functions? If you're saying like I could grab an apple or I could grab a banana, you just grab it, like it's still one thing. You're just
Yeah.
Related to the multiple functions. The thing is, for sexual, like for the genitals, there's no other, I even talked about this in Tuesday. Like there's no other purpose, like there's literally no other purpose, right? Hands have multiple functions that you can extrapolate, like. To be really honest, the vagina and penis have zero functions other than making babies. Like at all. So it's not even like, oh, there are multiple, like, no, women don't have them, we urinate just fine. Right, so a guy doesn't need it for anything other than making a baby. Just like to be.
That's your wife. That's your wife.
On Tuesday night. But like in all seriousness, and that's where the hand thing, that's where the hand argument, the eye argument falls apart. Because hands can do multiple things, but ultimately, like a hand, it grabs things, holds things, or touches things. So it's still a finite, like a limited.
Also, too, there's not like unity part of it. Like the sperm's not going where it's gotta go. You know what I mean? Like sperm's only got one thing to do.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
what do you say it like?
It's only do one thing. Sperm only does one thing. So it's not even like there are
Like you're-
multiple options for it. Like there's not multiple functions.
I really hope this is getting on the recording.
I really hope
Like-
not.
Are you gonna?
I'll tell him after the recording. what I said.
Okay, so I want to talk about what contraception does, because again, this is a helpful. I left the who said this off. We'll see if you can guess who said it. No, not until like 5 minutes from now after I said it. Contracepting couples cannot sacrifice their egoism to the good of their spouse. Will likewise lack generosity, patience, serenity, and calm assurance in their relations with their children. They will love their children to the degree to which their children bring them joy. That is selfishly and not for their own sakes. They will cajole them and teach them self-indulgence and self-love. Right, so he's talking about in a contracepting home. Instead of the peace given by self-mastery, unrest will reign in the family because the state of tension created by a truncated sexual act surrounded by precautions, an act that is to be an unreserved gift of self, must in the long term be communicated to the children. It seems that the increasing prevalence of anxiety, and even certain neuroses results in large part from contraceptive practices. Yes, it is John Paul II. Right, so, eminently practical, and he's like, look, you can tell the difference between a family that contracepts and a family that doesn't, just simply by the way they interact and love each other. Right, because it spills over into every other part of their interactions with each other. I did attribute this to him. But again, he goes at how this hurts women. All right. Contraception makes no contribution to the women's personal rights, since it is a process that makes it possible to satisfy the needs of the sexual instinct without taking on any of the responsibility for the consequences of sexual activity. It primarily benefits the man. This is why, once accepted, contraception leads to sanctioning his erotic hedonist behavior. In this regard, inevitably, the man benefits at the expense of the woman. He ceases to regard the woman in context of transmitting life. She becomes for him simply the occasion for enjoying pleasure. If one adds to this fact that it is inscribed in the very structure of man to take initiative in the sexual realm, and that the danger of being violated is a threat primarily to the woman, then one must admit that the more constitution of the woman appears grim indeed. Therefore, when contraception is used, the woman faces not only inequality, but also sexual slavery. All right, so he essentially is saying that the sexual revolution actually created a bunch of sexual slaves. And essentially it's women who bear the brunt of it, right? They have to take a pill to become like a man. So there's something about them is obviously fundamentally broken because they need a medication to fix it. And that medicine that completely makes them like a man also makes them feel like garbage 99.9% of their lives. Yeah, they essentially feel like they're pregnant hormonally. Interestingly enough, this was now a long time ago, but they had a contraceptive pill for men, and the men wouldn't take it. And so now millions and millions and millions of women.
Wait, there was a news article a few weeks ago about like they're trying to do the same
Yeah,
thing.
men will never take it.
Yeah, they always, every few
Yeah.
years they come out with a new one. Oh, this is better, has less symptoms, and men are all like, nope, don't wanna do it, get my wife, I'd rather get a vasectomy.
It screws up the body.
And
way too much
men get
for them.
praised for getting a vasectomy now. They're like, oh, you're such a good and caring man for getting a vasectomy. Like, oh, grow up.
You have to treat yourself like a dog.
You're an animal.
Yeah.
Alright, I don't feel to be neutered.
All right. Okay, any questions on what we talked about so far? So what I'm gonna do is then go to like what I think are objections. Yes, Aaron? One of you, it doesn't matter.
So is the issue contraception specifically and not birth control? Because it seems like natural family planning it's like birth control, but not contraception, right?
Yeah, so the natural family planning, so this is why I think that other argument works well too. God has clearly willed that not all sexual acts ends up in a baby, right? And so because of the way he's made the woman only fertile at certain times, which means that provided you act in accord with the nature of woman, that having sex during those times when she's not fertile, even if you know it, is permissible, right? It becomes impermissible though when you use it in the same way as you would contraception, right? So in other words, you use it in a way that you're totally like totally not open to life. So in other words, like you're still treating the baby as if it's something to be dreaded. And and there are people who do that. There are people who it's a very legalistic approach to it. And I don't necessarily think I feel more comfortable talking about this as a soapbox moment, but I don't think the church does a good job of actually like they always seem to default to thinking that couples have to use natural family planning. But the proper way would be there are only situations when you should use it. It's not the default to fall back to. And so like yeah, so a good example is a young couple I know that recently got married. They went through pre-Cana and in Phoenix, and they came here and got married, but, well, one of the things they had to do for their pre-Cana is the woman had to chart her fertility, and then she had to actually show it to someone, right? And she didn't really want to do that. And so they asked me about it, and I said, well, are you planning on using NFP? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, well, then tell them you're not planning on using NFP. Like they weren't planning on using contraception. They just didn't feel like they needed NFP. They felt like that when they got married, they would be open to life. Whatever happened, happened. But they sort of doubled down on them, making it, you have to learn how to use this. Well, no, you don't have to learn how to use that, because maybe you're not going to use it. Right. So that's sort of what I mean. It seems to be, it's a default thing, and nobody makes that distinction between, oh yeah, you're only supposed to use this certain times. Right.
Well, something else that's very underemphasized, though, is that NFP is just as helpful, if not more, for achieving pregnancy as it is.
Oh, for sure,
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that piece is, but that was not what they were emphasizing, right? They were not doing it so that, it was helpful to them. It was the more of just, well, everybody uses this. We're trying to give you something else to use besides.
Yeah, so see, he could sense it. It's more like, to me, like when we did our pre-Cana, we recently had like the talk with that, and it kind of like was almost sad because a lot of what they're having to do was kind of talk people out of contraception, because they already knew that these couples were living together. Majority of the couples in that room, apparently, we kind of figured out through the way they were talking to us. Definitely at least one definitely had to be living together. And I guess they were aware that at least one couple was having sex together. And the reason I say this is because they at one point go, if you're living together, and we know some of you are, you need to not. And you need to like figure out also if you're gonna continue to live together, sleep in separate rooms. Cause and they like kind of laid into it, which was really, really good. But that then made it awkward for like the NFP, because like they kind of were almost treating it as like, you don't need to use contraception because NFP exists. And it sucks because like, to me, I don't think they meant it in that way, but I think that they're so used to having those couples who come in.
Yes.
And they're not open to life, they want to just contracept, and then they're having to kind of sell NFP in that way. But I think it's because of that. I don't think like meeting these people and knowing kind of who they are, I don't think they were trying to do it that way, but again, it's also too late. They're almost having to sell instead of contraception.
So in like sort of inside.
That's not a good thing though.
Yeah,
necessarily.
I've taught for the diocese pre-Cana thing, and so I've seen the questionnaire at the end. And in the profile, like they do know who's living together because they've let it known. But one of the questions is, are you planning on using contraception or NFP? And the overwhelming majority of them still say contraception. So
It's
something has to be done differently in the way they
I think
present it.
it's a helpful way to do it, and I don't think you should sell NFP as a contraception, because like, though it could be technically better.
Yeah.
Well, it's still like. If you
Yeah,
want
there
to
needs to be a
if
change
you're
in.
thinking about marriage and you're thinking about sex, all the wrong way to start off.
Yeah, there needs to be a change in the way they think about it, first of all, which is what they don't do.
Freaking is probably like start catechizing on it. It's like a whole. Like, I mean, like obviously you should catechize on it, but like if people are already in pre-Cana and you're having to wrestle with those issues, it's like.
They literally
good luck
told
addressing
us
it and like.
2 weeks before that, someone in an interview with a priest said, I'm not open to having children. And they had to be like, are you sure? And he said, nope, don't want kids. And they, like, before their wedding, because their wedding was coming up, had to say, we're not marrying you. And this was something that like they got into an entire battle between with this person, where they're like, because that's what they asked, like, are you sure? Because
they just wasn't messing around.
yeah, they were just basically like, and so they had to call that whole wedding, but like, this is someone who got all the way through.
Yeah, they were
Through
good, but they
that.
were gonna be asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
and like they knew they're gonna be asked that question, and they still said no to that, thinking that was still okay. Like there's a mentality that's there, and like there's people there that are like, oh, I have no idea any of this even existed. Like it's kind of sad.
And one of the things that Carolina later JPG points out with NFP that's worth mentioning is he does say that like if you consistently like really practice it like over the years, it's really hard to continue maintaining it as an entirely contraceptive behavior, because some of it, you really harden your heart to it. Sure, but just like for most people, when you really put in the work over time, because like what you're still doing, it's kind of like growing in any other virtue. Like if you keep walking the walk, eventually you're gonna like your heart's gonna change, right? Like if you just time after time, month after month, have to like reverence the woman's body and like know what's going on, and you have to intentionally choose to not come together on those times, and you have to intentionally choose find other things to do with your time on those nights, like. Over time, that softens the heart, just because you're doing the things. It can take time, but like, it's really hard over the years to use NFP as entirely contraception without your heart softening.
So it should be like really not be using anything unless like a situation.
You just have a reason. You need to have a reason why you're doing it.
Those couples really probably shouldn't be using NFP and should just be
Yeah.
completely open to life the entire time.
Yeah, I think my issue is it seems to just be the default.
Yeah,
right.
it's like it should be like you are
Yeah.
open to life unless.
Do you have a reason?
Sets you off.
yeah.
Not, I go into marriage, not open to life.
I have a really close friend who got married last December, and he and his wife had their first child, I think in October, and we're like really excited about it. And he told me that it had actually, there had been some very kind of hurtful comments, actually, even from like other Catholics, of like, why did you get pregnant so soon? You're supposed to enjoy your first year of marriage. Like, why weren't you doing the NFP thing?
Mhm.
So that was just like awful. But that's the default position a lot of people come
Yeah.
from. It's like, get married and wait a while before having kids so you can enjoy it or whatever.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So Rob, I have two questions.
Okay.
Is, can somebody who's baptized contract only a natural marriage? Like if you renounce the faith, can you contract a natural marriage? Are you bound?
If you marry another baptized person,
Yeah.
I think it would still be a sacramental marriage, whether you.
So my follow-up question is like the church says like, I won't marry you if you're not open to life, because if that's in the nature of marriage, you have to be open to life. So is it the same for a natural marriage? Like if two people decide to get married, quote unquote, but they're like, I'm not having kids, like are those dates even married?
That could be an impediment to it. Like, I don't know like where their intention is, right?
Yeah.
Because remember, it's always the intention on the day the vows are, like, they could have decided, like, they could have genuinely said, yes, we're open to children, and then change their mind. Right?
Yeah, that would validate it, but if they were like, no, we're not having children, and they later had children, would that?
I still think that would be an impediment to. That would be a case where they should go get their marriage validated, right? Like, if they know they lied during their vows, like, even if they change their mind later.
It's like a wedding.
I don't know, did they take that vow to have children?
No.
But if they didn't.
But I'm
are they
just
even
saying, like,
married?
they could
Or
wait
is
for
that-
the marriage and have.
Yeah, but it's still like, it's still their consent is one of the things, right? Like, what are they consenting to?
Would they not be considered marriage then? So they're just like. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I don't know the answer there. Like,
It's sort of like God is willing to give the graces there as long as the person is willing. So let's say like someone gets baptized, but they're like God makes it incredibly easy to get baptized because he wants everyone to see, like anyone can get baptized. So I think even the day let's say they were had some impediment, but then later on were able to overcome that with the graces of the sacrament of marriage. I feel like that's a valid.
yeah, I think in those situations, like, from that perspective, they would want to go get their marriage, like, validated. Because, like, it really doesn't, like, it really matters on the moment they give consent where, like, whether they're giving, they can give consent and what they're giving consent to, regardless of if they change their mind. But like, to Aaron's point, like, you're talking about something different, like,
Yeah, you're like, you're not a baptized person.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get married.
I guess.
You're not, it's like, is that even marriage? Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I would say that that's nothing more than, it's,
To live together?
it would hard to be called that marriage, right? Especially given our definition, right? Like, because it's supposed to be ordered towards that.
We were talking about this the other night as well, like, Mr. Michael's cousin, for when they got married a couple years ago, I was horrified by the vows, because the vows were basically like,
Ryan was shredding them.
I was
As they were
furious.
being shredded.
I was
Cause they were,
Well, it was just like a lot of the like, I'll love you, but then literally like lines of like, and we'll grow as two pillars next to each other. Me like to be a nerd. I was like, what the frick? That's the opposite of what marriage is. But like for vows like that, when there's no real talk of like even union, let alone anything of like maybe lifelong commitment, but nothing related to anything. They're pregnant with baby number 2. So like clearly an openness to life. But like none of the vows talked about it. None of the vows talked about like a union of coming together. Would that count as like, even if they're both baptized Christians, like would that count as
Yeah, I think
sacramental marriage?
I would think there has to be certain there's certain elements of of what they're consenting to.
So if they don't say,
is that part of
Yeah.
like the matter of
Yeah, I mean, it would matter what vows they're actually taking, right? So, I don't know that like when you put flowery language, what does that mean even? Like, what are they, is it clear what, like, cause part of the marriage vows, right, is they're very clear as to what you're consenting to, right?
yeah,
Like love, honor, obey, like sickness, health, like they're all two pillars growing beside each other. What am I actually promising to
right,
do?
like, I just promised to be a lifelong.
Yeah, am I just gonna stand next to you? Like, is that all I do is a pillar? Like,
kind of
pillars don't do a whole lot.
They don't grow out.
Yeah, they don't, yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
I was upset. I was upset.
So I think that's, I mean, I'm sure that they poured their heart into those vows, but they're meaningless because how do you understand them? Like,
Yeah.
like, what am I promising to do?
That's the thing, where it's like a lot of, I went to the like, how to write your vows, I was like, now the church did that for me a long time ago, easy. But yeah, because it's interesting watching, it's like the way, like, what we can tell, like, it's a loving marriage, like, it's a good marriage, it's a good woman. Baby number 2, right, like, all the things. But yeah, it was just like, because there's so many people now who have these like flowery
Mhm.
vows that mean nothing, but if they're vowing basically nothing, did they vow anything? Are they actually like, would their marriage be recognized by the church?
That one, probably not. Right, like, that, yeah, the church would definitely can validate that, like, and that's part of the reason why the church does that. Right, because they don't really know what vows they've taken. Right,
I couldn't believe it.
Do you have to hold if you don't do vows, Brenda? Do you co-validate that, or do you just have them read the entire report?
no, so like I saw this the other day, like somebody came into the church. And she got confirmed and got her first communion, and they basically just reset their vows. They
Okay,
were already married. Well, I mean, I don't know if it was right, like, maybe that's what they said the first time, but they were not married. The church did not marry them. And so the church presumes that something may have been irregular about it.
Right, can't see me, can't stand, except for, is there, I'm guessing there would be have to stay in the shower.
It's the consent. It's the consent. There's a little bit of liberty in the words themselves. Yeah, but it's like yeah, the form is the words themselves. So the consent of the spouses, right?
But it's up that, making up your own vows. Not. need a-
I mean, from a Catholic perspective, no, that's why they don't do that, right? Like, they wouldn't let you do it.
I mean, it's also like marriage, that all the other sacraments were instituted by Christ. The sacrament of marriage is instituted by Christ, and the natural institution of marriage was given before, so like. I mean, two new people could technically get married, like if they gave consent to what they knew marriage was, right? So I mean, you would.
Yeah,
That's the reason there's not like a prescribed form like.
right, but I think that going back to like Aaron's question, right? So like you see what the natural form of marriage is in the garden, right? Like, and a key element of that is being fruitful and multiplying.
Mhm.
Right,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so that's a key element of even like a natural marriage, and so I think without that, I mean, it might be reasonable to say that they're not actually married.
I have a larger question is like. If indissoluble is a big part too. Most people, I would say, most people would like their marriage to last their lifetime, but they don't think it's indissoluble.
No,
So like, does that invalidate like most marriages?
Well, I mean, what they think and what their intention is, right, are two different things, right? So it would come down to their intention, right? So if they're like, it could happen. Either way,
But so, what if their intention is to enter into something that they can get out of if they want to?
oh, that would definitely.
But I would say most people
Yeah,
do that.
that would be an impediment.
Yeah.
That would definitely be an impediment.
My twin had some Protestant friends who entered the church, I think a year ago, and they had a prenup when they got married before, or when they were Protestant out. Created a whole lot of mess when they were getting ready to enter the church. Especially because the marriage was not very pastoral, not very.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely can be an impediment.
So is it a requirement to have witnesses and the officiants or whatever? I mean,
it does have to be witnessed, right? So yes, I mean, it would be,
just has to be public.
which would require witnesses, right? Like, which is why, part of the reason why, you can't go to like a same-sex wedding, right, is because you're actually participating in it. Because you're witnessing it, right? Like, a wedding is a public act. And so like, you can't just be like an observer to it. You're actually like part of the consent, right? Like you're, when they ask the question, does anyone object, right? Like,
Yeah, I'm sure you asked.
I mean, they still do it in definitely in like public settings. Yeah,
This is also why we can't go in Protestant weddings, correct? So you're just like
yeah, it depends.
acknowledging and participating.
Yeah, so it just depends. I mean, it depends on what's like the situation. Like, I can safely say, like, you shouldn't go to, you should not go to a same-sex wedding. You should not go, yeah, whatever you call it. You should not go to somebody who's getting married a second time. Assuming that their real spouse is still alive. Protestant weddings, depends. And then people who may or may not, like, people who are Catholic but getting married somewhere else, the situation also depends too. So if they have like totally sort of repudiated the Catholic faith, then you can go, but if they're kind of still say they're Catholic but getting married somewhere else, you shouldn't go either.
Is that the same consideration?
Yeah, the Protestant thing it would depend, I think, on the situation.
Can you go to the reception?
Yes, but like, do you want to do that though? Like, it's kind of a mixed message, right? Yeah.
It's pretty clear if you don't intend the ceremony.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to have like celebrate something you think was a bad thing. Yeah. But yeah, but the cake is really good.
But there's an open bar.
I mean, technically, I guess you could go, but that'd be a weird thing to do, right? Like,
Yeah, but I think wouldn't that? I don't know, what would say more, like not going at all or just going to the reception? And then, because then people would be like, oh, why aren't you there?
well, but they could also just go, oh, he couldn't come to the wedding. I'm glad he came to the reception. Andrew's a great guy. He loves us. He loves what we're doing.
You could argue that going to the reception could be like a major scandal.
The reception is to
Because it's
celebrate.
still-
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be problematic, I think.
Yeah.
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 If I were one of the people getting like married too, I probably would want you there. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, probably not.
I'm
Like,
happy that I did this by eating.
Just in
It's
general.
like after sitting a wedding, that's some of it.
But you
Really.
make it clear, right? You tell them, okay,
Yeah.
ceremony.
Yeah, that's what my roommate did. She like sent her family a text, was like, you still call yourself Catholic, you're not really Catholic. And was like, I love you, but because I love you, I'm not coming to your wedding. And they were like, and she like, my family's still kind of pissy about it, but she's like, the thing is like, they don't love, it's not because they love me, they didn't talk to me about this, it's because I didn't stop anything and drop everything for them to show them just how much I care. It's because I didn't make it about them. I made it about God, and I put God before them. That's what upset them. And like, that's how it happens to a lot of people, I think, honestly. They get upset because you put God before them and they don't want to acknowledge that that's how it's supposed to work.
They can answer no. I just thought about it, like. If something doesn't align with your values, and goes to party after,